Hey everyone, I'm Ashleigh Banfield, and this is Drop Dead Serious, day 28 of the federal sex trafficking trial against Sean Diddy Combs. And it was, it was relentless, shall we say. We're talking about explicit text messages, graphic videos, coordinated travel with escorts, drug menus, baby oil, and receipts. So many receipts, like hours and hours of receipts. If you're into this, like if you're really into proving a case down to the arcane letter of the law, this was the day for you, because it was like charts and graphs and receipts and paperwork, right? Mixed in with a lot of dirty, sexy messages and evidence. So the prosecution was racing through mountains and mountains of the digital stuff, all the digital evidence, trying to prove that what looked like luxury and excess was actually enterprise-fueled exploitation. But the biggest shocker of the entire day was when Diddy's lawyers confirmed that he ain't going to be calling a single witness. And he's not going to be taking the stand either. Squeeze me, baking powder. I mean, honestly, I thought for sure that Diddy's lawyers would trot out a whole bunch of Diddy acolytes who would say he was the greatest. I never saw any of this. The women were into it. There was no coercion, no forced trafficking, none of this stuff, right? But there's two things I can think of. Number one, he doesn't think that the prosecutors have done the job. Number two, he doesn't have those people. But what this means is that the testimony's almost over. And closing arguments are like just days away. Like I can see the finish line. And later in this episode, I'm going to need you to pour a drink, buckle up, whatever it is you do to chill, because we are diving deep into the pages of leaked text messages that were just released by the government over the weekend. And these are not rumors. These are actual text messages between Diddy's team amongst themselves, talking about sex luggages and baby oil shipments and drug bags and bags of dicks. That is not a typo. Bags of dicks. And yes, it is just about as outrageous as it sounds. And like shipments, get this much baby oil and lube. Is this enough? No, double it. Like, I'm kidding you not. It looks like it's a comedy sketch. When I read it for you in just a hot minute, you will see what I mean, but I couldn't believe it. I had to read it twice, 3 times, 4 actually, and then write it. So let me dive right into everything that happened today. Day 28 of the federal trial against Diddy picked up right where it left off with Special Agent Joseph Cerciello. Can I just say I had a long debate with my staff. Some Italian, some not Italian. How do you pronounce Cerciello? Cerciello. I thought maybe it was Cercello or Cerciello. I don't know. But one of my Italian staff members said if there's a single C, you say C, and if it's a double C, you say ch. So while some thought it was Cerciello, I'm sticking with Cerciello, and I hope I'm not wrong, but Agent, if you're out there, call me. So he was back on the stand, and if you remember, Agent Cerciello was the one who was walking the jury through the massive charts of digital evidence, basically what prosecutors are calling a roadmap of Diddy's alleged criminal enterprise. Today, the prosecutor zoomed in on 2 key timeframes, September 2022 and December 2021. And I'm going to start with September of 2022. Agent Cerciello walked the jury through what happened during the weekend of September 24th and September 25th, the weekend that took place across 2 cities, Los Angeles and Las Vegas. Listed on the evidence chart for those dates were 3 names: Diddy, Jane Doe, and a man named Paul Arthur. Yes, you probably remember. That's the name of an alleged escort. At least the prosecutors say an escort. There were flight records and payment records and text messages with what the feds like to call receipts, right? One of the text messages was from Diddy to KK, Christina Coram, AKA his chief of staff. And in it, Diddy says, quote, really wanted to have a fun night in Vegas with someone he called her. And then came the audio messages. The audio was played directly into the jurors' headphones, which meant you and me and the rest of the schlubby public, everybody in the courtroom, they just had to sit there and watch in silence. And that made it really tough to follow the full context. But reporters did catch one detail. In one message, KK reminds Diddy that there's a box of Plan B in his nightstand. And she repeats that reminder in a later message too. Like as if to say, if y'all go bareback, use the Plan B so you don't have any more of them kids. Okay, so then the focus shifted to texts and flights and explicit video. Agent Cerciello testified that he reviewed what he called, quote, many hours of graphic footage. Can you imagine being him? Just think for a minute. As a normal course of your workday, you're going to watch like 50 hours of Diddy porn. And what are you supposed to tell your like work colleagues? Like, sorry, this is not safe for work. Don't anybody come around my monitor. Or, hey, HR, I need to just be like watching porn for the next 5, 6, 8 days. I can't imagine. But I guess, look, if you work in sex trafficking, that is what you have to do. For Agent Cerciello, these were videos that were pulled from seized electronics. And nearly all of them featured Jane Doe and a man identified as Cabral. And by the way, we have been thinking that Cabral, because it's only said in court, not written to the reporters, that it was C-A-B-R-A-L, but today we learned it's K-A-B-R-A-L-E. Cabrale or Cabral or whatever you want to say, but he's an escort that we've heard about during past testimony multiple times. And yes, Diddy was visible in some of the videos that the agent was watching, forced to watch. In other videos, there were additional men as well. And the jury was shown actual clips of actual freak-offs, some lasting like 45 seconds, others stretching more than 2 minutes. But the bulk of today's video evidence came from the week of December 17th to December 21st, right around the holidays in 2021. Merry Christmas. Agent Cerciello said that he reviewed roughly 50 separate videos from just those 5 days. Okay, think about it. Could you shoot 50 full videos in 5 days? Could you have sex 50 times in 5 days? Anyway, that's what the agent said they had to watch. And some of them were only partially played for the jury. 45 seconds here, 2 minutes there. But one of them, one of the full videos was actually shown in its entirety. And the prosecution clearly here wants to show a pattern, not just of behavior, but of enterprise, like enterprise level planning, evidence of sex acts, coordination with escorts, cross-state, even international movement, financial records, messaging, video, all coming together. And then the calendar jumped almost 2 years ahead to September 2024. And if you're keeping track, that is less than a year ago from right now, right? According to Special Agent Cerciello, that weekend involved multiple hotel bookings in New York City at the Trump International and another at the Whitby. The names attached to those reservations, Jane Doe, Diddy, someone named Robert, and an escort named, say it with me, Cabral, K-A-B-R-A-L-E. But now I got a last name. And I've been waiting for a last name on this Cabral fella, and they say it's Williams. So Cabral Williams, not very Italian, but okay. This part of the chart didn't just map out movements, though. This part of the chart started mapping out the money, because if it's sex trafficking and if you're trying to show enterprise, you're probably going to have to show some payments and match it to the action. So Agent Cerciello showed the jury a spreadsheet of financial transactions tied to the trip. It was organized almost like a customer database, listing who stayed where and who paid for what and which accounts picked up the tab. That was what the government did, right? And there were like 3 key names on this part of the chart: Jonathan Perez, Jane Doe, and, say it with me, Cabral Williams. Jonathan Perez, you'll remember, is one of Diddy's assistants and was connected to 2 hotel bills at the Trump International, both of which the government says were paid for using Diddy's American Express card. And to back that up, the jurors were shown the actual Amex statements. Jane's travel expenses, including cars and flights, those were covered by Jessica Ruiz. Do you remember that name? If you've been watching, if you've been listening, if you've been following all my coverage, you probably remember Jessica Ruiz is Diddy's corporate travel manager. Yeah. There was also a corporate entity labeled CEOPCO. So I'm calling it CE OPCO. And that, same Amex bill, it listed Bad Boy Entertainment as the payment maker. Bad Boy Inc. would be what the government considers the enterprise that Diddy was using to carry out what they say wasn't just illegal sex, but, coerced sex and drug dealing and drug use, all sorts of illegal stuff. That's what the government says. And then there was Cabral the escort, whose flights on United Airlines were booked using Jane's own Visa card. But maybe the most eye-opening detail was a wire transfer. Just days after that New York City trip, Diddy wired Jane $5,000. And that transaction didn't happen in a vacuum. The jurors were shown an email from Diddy's longtime employee, Robin Greenhill, the one who's been implicated in several earlier financial transactions, that she appeared to be coordinating or facilitating the money transfer. And again, it's not just about who flew where or who paid for what dinner. It's about proving that Diddy used the machinery of his business, his money, his assistants, his credit cards, his wire transfers, his company expense accounts, and his staff to fund and to enable or to cover up illegal conduct. And if he's sending Cassie $5,000, or if he's sending Jane $5,000, or if he's sending anybody $5,000 after what the government says is a bunch of illegal sex and drug activity, maybe it's to reimburse the sex worker or to pay for the drugs. Little hard to prove that unless you've got all these receipts, but that's what they're building here, right? So this is what RICO is all about. And this spreadsheet, it was not just an accounting tool, it was a blueprint. And it's one more thread that the prosecution hopes will tighten the net around Sean Diddy Combs. And next up, Special Agent Cerciello introduced yet another chart, a sprawling timeline of text messages, financials, and digital records from December 2021 to June of 2024, nearly 3 full years of curated communications. The first section of the screen was a familiar one to us because it focused on that same weekend in September of 2023, the New York trip, to the Trump Hotel and the Whitby hotels, those guys. Most of this one, the jury had already seen, but a few moments still landed pretty hard, like the text message that Jane sent to Diddy that very weekend. Are you ready? Because this is what the government wants to hammer home to this jury. Quote, "I don't want to be used and locked in a room to perform and fulfill your fantasies," end quote. And Diddy's response? Instead of denying it, he doubled down, referencing something he'd said on a podcast and trying to justify the behavior that Jane was calling out. The prosecutors are trying to show that Diddy's conduct wasn't isolated or impulsive, that it was deliberate, it was controlled, it was repeated over and over again, they say. But here's where the chart and the timeline took on a new kind of weight, because when you lay everything out chronologically, patterns begin to emerge. And one detail in particular stood out like a flashing red light. Right around the time that Jane agreed to come to New York, when she and Diddy were texting back and forth about how the trip would go, whether they'd have a chill movie night or bring in an entertainer, and Diddy suggesting maybe it'd be her choice, she could decide. Diddy at the very same time is having a very different conversation in parallel. Prosecutors showed that he was messaging with a woman named Bridget. Bridget was a booking agent and a manager for Cowboys and Angels, the upscale male escort agency. And while he's reassuring his girlfriend, Jane, that they'd keep things low-key, he was open to whatever she wanted, he's actively trying to line up paid sex workers for that visit. Just what Jane said in her testimony. I would say I want to chill, I just want to have loving time with you, and suddenly these male escorts would show up and the performance was on and would go for days. Right? So here are the receipts that show if you think she's lying on the stand, well, then what's this stuff? The conversations going on with Bridget, the booking agent at the male escort agency. So maybe she's not lying on the stand. How could she know that we had these receipts? Well, how could we have these receipts? right? Later on, the government showed messages between Diddy and Bridget, Bridget, the escort lady, about payment for another escort. Bridget texted, "Good morning." The next day, she's gently noting that his payment is $600 shy of what it should be. And Diddy snapped back and texted, quote, "LOL, he couldn't even perform," end quote. Bridget reminded Diddy the fee was for the escort's time, not necessarily performance. Quote, "You could be skydiving or dancing with them," she said. "You're still paying for their time," end quote. Diddy got offended, said he was a longtime customer and deserved respect. Eventually, they smoothed things over, and Bridget chalked the payment issue up to someone else booking on his behalf. Here is what's so important about that exchange that I just told you, right? This is the thing that Diddy is probably going to fight like hell. Those charges of, quote, transportation to engage in prostitution, end quote. Think of that charge. Transportation to engage in prostitution. Well, you got him dead to rights. If you got the ticket for the hooker to fly across the state lines and have sex in a freak-off and pay said hooker, that is transportation to engage in prostitution. How can you fight that? Well, if you're Diddy, how about by arguing exactly what Bridget from Cowboys and Angels just said to him in that text? She scolded Diddy, saying that he was, quote, paying for the escort's time, not for the escort's talented sexual performance, right? Diddy will likely appeal to the jury by saying the cash that was handed over to these escorts and these bills that were paid was for the escort's time and their discretion. Nothing illegal about that. Not for the endless hours and days of sex that they doled out in the freak-offs. And then it's going to be up to the jury to, what your gut tell you. What's reasonable? What's reasonable? Is my time worth $6,000 to be discreet? Discreet about what? Or are they actually being paid? Because I can tell you this. One of those escorts named Odie told us at News Nation on my Banfield show, told us that this sex was extra. Pay me extra. He said the deal was made. But Sheree did not necessarily say it in that language. I think if I prod him a little further, maybe I might be able to find out if, was it an understanding? I'll do the sexy part here rather than just dancing, but it's going to cost you. The dancing might cost X, but the sex will cost you XX, As for the chaos of the communications, it didn't stop with the Cowboys and Angels. Brendan Paul, Diddy's right-hand man, was texting with somebody named Richie about IV treatments. He originally asked for 3 IV setups and then said, yeah, no worries, 2 should be enough. But Brendan Paul made one thing very clear. Combs needed extra Benadryl in his IV. Then the chart moved to the return travel from that Trump hotel weekend. Flight records confirming Jane and Cabral's departure from New York. KK, Diddy's assistant, his chief of staff, texted Diddy after the trip, seemingly frustrated. She told Diddy not to leave a location in the middle of the night without telling her or telling the staff. She said it's a security risk, not just for him, but for everybody involved. She said, quote, "Puff, seriously, I love you to death, but you have got to stop." He seemed to brush it off. And then the jury heard a voice memo, Diddy speaking directly to KK. He sounded slightly sheepish. The message started with, quote, "I don't know why I'm calling you about this." But then he got right to the point. He was out of baby oil. And he needed her to get more. I wish I could be a fly on the wall for those conversations. Hi. Those 25, 40, 80 bottles of baby oil. I'm going to need some more. Anyway, then came the list. KK sent Diddy a full inventory of what she had requested for his extended stay. 7 bottles of baby oil, 7 bottles of Astroglide, and an Apple TV. Oh, and soup. Soup. I guess Diddy wanted a special brand of soup because, soup. That wasn't all he told KK to grab. He wanted her to grab some other things, in fact, other things that he might need as well, so that he wouldn't, quote, have to bother the team, end quote. And then came another request, Cialis. And when KK did not answer him fast enough, Diddy sent a message with a tone that was impossible to misread. Quote, "I'm going to keep calling you if you don't get me what I need," end quote. Next, jurors saw an angry text exchange that they have seen before. Jane wrote to Diddy, quote, "I don't want to be fucked and mistreated. I don't feel like performing loveless, cold sex," end quote. Diddy shot back, calling her crazy, mocking her, quote, "detective skills," end quote. Jane replied, "It's been 3 years of me having to fuck strangers." They had a full-blown argument. Emotions boiled over. And finally, Jane asked for a break. But just when it seemed like Jane and Diddy had hit a breaking point, the tone shifted again. Diddy sent Jane a text, said that he was horny. Horny as, quote, fuck, with 4 C's. So like, fuck. I think he wanted to do the U's, but whatever. The government believes that this shows that Jane was coerced into participating in these disgusting freak-offs, even when she voiced her objections. And then finally, it was time for cross-examination. Diddy's defense team stepped up, and the pace slowed down. The rapid-fire chart reading from the prosecution gave way to something more methodical. And let's not forget here, when we say that, Jane says these things, "I don't want this anymore, this is disgusting, I feel like you're a hooker," these are my words, but you heard what she said. When does it become coercion? When does it become forced? When might it, if you're Diddy's team, when might it instead be, "I changed my mind. I do want to do this with you. I didn't want to do it earlier, and I told you I was pissed off, but then you gave me something shiny and pretty, and now I'm good again." Because that, I think, is what you are going to hear Diddy's lawyers say. I think you can't say that with Cassie, because I don't think he gave her shiny things except shiners, if you believe her testimony and the photos and other people's testimony. And if you believe your lying eyes when you saw her being beat to shit in a hotel hallway, I think you can't say that about Cassie. I think Cassie genuinely was afraid, right? Because she was being beaten, because she was being tracked. Even if she went to a party at Prince's house, she'd be tracked down and beaten there, according to the testimony. So that, my friends, is fear and coercion. If you want to prove to a jury of fear and coercion, you can show them that whole Cassie line of evidence. Jane, I'm not so sure. She did talk about one incident of beating, but it wasn't a pattern. With her, it was more, "I want my apartment. It's expensive, it's fancy. I like this life. I have a child." I guess if you're the government, you're going to say, well, he set her up in a lifestyle and then dangled it and said, "You have to do this if you want to keep it." That's a gray area, I think, for the jurors, right? So defense attorney Tenny Garagos opened with one of the prosecution's own exhibits and zoomed in on a very specific detail. 2 hotel stays listed on the chart were paid for by Sean Combs, not CE Opco, not Bad Boy Entertainment, not an alias. It was paid for by his personal name. And then she dropped something new, an invoice from CE Opco, LLC, directly to Sean Combs, dated September 2023. And that bill, along with something called an account quick report, showed that every single charge listed for Jane in the government's exhibit had a corresponding payment under Sean Combs' name. The implication here being that even the CE Opco charges, the ones that the prosecution labeled as like enterprise expenses, were ultimately being covered, paid back by Diddy himself. Even if he had to reimburse, his own enterprise, his own companies, like short that little extra piece that Diddy was paying it back, it just looks like he had the company pay for all this stuff. So that's going to be pretty strong. Just depends on how many of those payments, right? Maybe Jane, maybe every one of the Jane payments on that chart, but what about all the other stuff? What about the drugs? What about the other guys? What about the escorts? What about Cassie? What about? I mean, there's been so much evidence in these past many weeks. Agent Cerciello, under oath, admitted that he had never seen the invoice before, the one that I just talked about. He'd never seen the account quick report either. So maybe a bit of a surprise to the government, maybe a surprise to this agent. And it may seem like a minor accounting discrepancy, but in a RICO case where the government has to prove that Diddy used his business to carry out his crimes, the defense hopes that this could crack the foundation, even if just a little bit. Because what's reasonable? If you're looking at doubt, what's reasonable? An eensy-weensy bit of doubt on some of the evidence? For some people, that might be reasonable. For others, they might be like, show me more. But that's why you got 12 jurors. If Sean Combs, the individual, was paying for everything personally, that could raise questions about whether the alleged crimes were really carried out through the enterprise. But again, let's be frank, everybody. Like, work with me here. How many weeks have we been at this now? Almost 7. There's been overwhelming evidence presented showing that Diddy was regularly using his staff and petty cash and company credit cards and company vehicles, all to carry out these freak-offs, king nights, wild king nights, whatever the hell else he wanted to call them. They were the sex parties that the government said were all illegal. And that's exactly what the defense wants this jury to reject. Next, Teddy Garagos, Diddy's lawyer, brought up the text messages that were left out of the prosecution's carefully curated timelines. Messages from Jane to Diddy that weren't just warm, they were explicit. The courtroom screens lit up with messages of a sexual nature that Jane had sent to Diddy directly, texts that did not appear anywhere in the government's chronological charts. And when Garagos read Diddy's response to one of them aloud, where Diddy simply writes the word phew, even Agent Cerciello let out a bit of a chuckle. Then the focus shifted to Jane and Cabral. This is going to be strong for the jury, strong for Diddy. Teddy Garagos introduced more text messages that were not on the prosecution's chart. And in these texts, it was Jane who was reaching out to the escort. She initiated the conversations with the male escort, even invited Cabral to come and see her, maybe even travel with her. And their exchange quickly turned flirtatious. Jane wrote, "Sheesh, you need to come with a warning sign." And Cabral responded by sending pictures and teasing, quote, "I'm serving orgasms and foodgasms." Jane told him she was horny, that she was touching herself, and offered to fly him out. When Cabral said he was on his way, Jane texted, quote, "I'm too excited right now." So think about that. That's a private conversation between Jane and the escort. This is not something to make Diddy happy, right? The argument for a lot of the time has been, I pretended to be into it. I pretended to be a part of this because I wanted to make my partner happy. Well, how is it making your partner happy if you're having this private, sexy conversation with flirtatious sex messages with an escort, suggesting maybe he travel with you? That's going to be strong. That's going to be strong for Diddy. And then the videos. The screens visible to the public were shut off yet again, but the jury remained glued to their monitors. They were shown roughly 1 minute of an explicit video dated November 2021. And then another 3 minutes, and then 35 more seconds, all from the same recording. They also viewed the first minute of a second video from that same day, followed by 2 more segments, one 23 seconds long and another 40 seconds long. And then came a 2-minute clip from another night, and that video was played in full. So think about it for a second. If the government is showing pieces of video, well, then Diddy's lawyers are going to come in and show the other pieces, right? Because maybe, and I can't tell you because we weren't allowed to see them, maybe the videos that the government was showing the jury showed an incapacitated Jane or Cassie. Maybe those videos showed Cassie and Jane looking like they were in pain or getting directions that they didn't want to do or arguing back saying, I don't want to do this. Maybe. We don't know. We couldn't see or hear them. But then Diddy will put in clips that maybe show that they were really into it. Maybe that they were even doing the direction themselves. Maybe that Cassie or Jane was telling the escort, do more, make it, I can't say it. You know what I mean. Really, really into it. You know, the other side of the video that maybe was cherry picked. Next, the jury was shown another set of text messages. Jane texted Cabral asking what he was up to and inviting him to Miami. He told her, quote, "I'm definitely free Sunday. I can make that happen." Jane then texted Diddy, not to ask for permission, but to surprise him. She teased a healthy pre-gaming session, referencing like alkaline water and more of the same stuff that will help them get through like a big sex session. The tone was playful and light, affectionate. And after their encounter, Jane sent Cabral a thank you message, which read, quote, "Thank you for making me feel beautiful." Cabral replied that she'd used his, quote, government name during their time together. And Jane told him, quote, "I like your name." Think about this, guys. This is Jane being sweet and lovely and saying everything was fantastic to the escort, not for Diddy's benefit, not because she's trying to make her partner happy here, right? If you're just having these quiet conversations with Cabral, it's going to sound to the jury like you were into it, and you're still into it because you're messaging the guy without Diddy even knowing. This is not to make your partner happy, not to please him against your will. The defense wanted to show that this was intimate and personal and very different from the narrative that the prosecutors had spent weeks building, the forced and fraudulent and coerced narrative. And for the defense, these messages, raw, revealing, and absent from the government's timeline, were the kind of context that they're counting on to raise reasonable doubt. And that is how day 28 came to a close, with Agent Joseph Cerciello stepping down for the day and the courtroom bracing for this final stretch. Thank you, Jesus. Now, he's going to be back tomorrow, just for the morning, to finish off his cross-examination. But after that, my friends, the government will rest its case. But now we need to talk about those shocking text messages that I told you about at the beginning of this episode. First, though, there is something that's really getting under my skin lately. It's my data. It is out there, it is everywhere, and so is yours, I'm sorry to say. And I am really sick and tired of getting spammed. I'm sick and tired of getting scammed left, right, and center. Data brokers are responsible. They are freaking selling our information, everybody, to the highest bidder, and they're making a fortune. It turns out that we have rights, though, when it comes to these data brokers. We have the right to tell them, take my information down, and then they have to do it. That sounds great, but it's a big problem to scan the entire web and find all the data brokers who are doing this and shut them down one by one because they just keep propping up like whack-a-mole. So I use a service called Incogni. They have wiped so much of my data from so many databases, and they're still at it as we speak. This isn't just power. This is peace of mind for me. It can be for you. So listen, if privacy is an issue, like it is to me, just go to incogni.com/dropdead. And if you use my code DROPDEAD, I'll give you 60% off. Yeah, 60% off. Again, it's incogni.com/dropdead. Use that code DROPDEAD, and let's get these mofos to take our data down, y'all. Now, back to the messages. Remember the drink I told you to pour, or whatever it is that you get your Zen from? Over the weekend, the government released pages and pages of internal messages that were shared between Diddy's staff members. And let me be very, very clear. These are real messages. They're screenshots, and they are so incredibly insightful about the daily routines around pleasing their boss. No matter what the request, nothing was too much for these people. Forget hearsay. This is Diddy's inner circle, coordinating hotels, the setups, the sex parties, the drug runs, and the oily inventory checks in writing. So let's start with the basics. And I'm going to need to give you a bit of a glossary of terms here. There's AG and there's BO, and BO is not body odor. AG stands for Astroglide, and BO stands for, can you guess? Baby oil. So Joey Chavez, one of Diddy's assistants, writes this: need more BO and AG tomorrow before everyone's leaving Thursday morning. Frank Butler, another staffer, responds, just packed 30 bottles of baby oil, Joey. Exactly how much of each do we need? And Joey doesn't hesitate, responding, as much as possible. Later, Joey asks, What's our BO/AG count? And Frank replies, 30 plus on each. And then came this from Frank Butler. We need to put Jane on payroll if she ain't already. That's important, right? Because now you're suggesting Jane is an employee on payroll and is now responsible for sex as an employee. Very important, right? Talking enterprise. That text in the middle of coordinating a hotel sex setup was even marked loved by another assistant, but it gets even more explicit. A Puff assistant sends this message. Okay, I need to refresh her bag of dicks and send to her. Let me reread that for a hot minute. Okay, I need to refresh her bag of dicks and send to her. And Brendan Paul, yes, the same Brendan Paul that took immunity just a few days ago, the basketball star from Syracuse University, he does a LOL. He laughs at the message. And Frank Butler adds, need the sex luggages and light, which I think means lights because there were always red lights set up in the hotels when the freak-offs were happening, according to the government. And then after some references that appear to suggest picking up drugs downtown, another assistant jumps in and says, shit, I know it's going to be good. And then from Frank Butler, quote, we about to find out. Diddy's longtime assistant KK then checks in on the hotel prep. She texts the team asking how the setup was going and what Jane needs. And one assistant responds that they'll get an outfit or that they'll get outfit options and send them directly to Jane. But KK replies, send them to me and I'll send them on to Jane. And then there is the hotel cleanup messages, and brace yourself for this one because several assistants have already testified that they were tasked with cleaning up Diddy's hotel rooms post-freak-off. This was, according to them, so that the hotel staff wouldn't come in first, be able to see all this evidence of what happened there, maybe even snap some pictures and sell pictures to the tabloids. So, Diddy's staff members were asked to come in beforehand and clean up, according to the government. The staff members testified that there were regularly baby oil and lube all over the place, on the furniture, on the bed, on the floor, the curtains, the walls, plus used condoms that needed picking up. One assistant said he wore gloves for cleanliness. Sheets and towels were scattered all over the place. And KK texts this, how's the cleanup going? And the response from Diddy's assistant, Joey Chavez, slipped and fell twice. I don't know if that was supposed to be funny or if it actually happened, but I immediately got a picture that I will never be able to unsee in my mind of all of this lube and baby oil everywhere, and Joey Chavez like whoop, feet out from under him, boom, right on his back because of the lube. But I don't know, maybe it was a joke. And then what about the drugs? Diddy's staff didn't hide a thing. They refer repeatedly to the Gucci bag, code for the designer bag that the government says, and witnesses say, held Diddy's personal stash of drugs. One assistant confirms the Gucci bag means his drug bag. Another thread discusses how to retrieve it while warning not to steal his Adderall. And if you think that's wild, just wait. One page is basically an entire shopping list for an orgy. One assistant writes, order a huge shipment of baby oil and Astroglide. The next entry is the shopping list itself. 16 3-ounce bottles of baby oil, 24 14-ounce bottles of baby oil, 15 5-ounce bottles of Astroglide, and 15 2.5-ounce bottles of Astroglide. Quote, since huge is relative, let me know if you don't think that's enough, end quote. And the reply to that order, double it. Quote unquote, double it. An assistant also asks, can we start storing it in the black bathroom? I'd prefer that there's no lube or personal sexy time items in the gift room, end quote. And then somebody says, Brian, we need all hands on deck in the master. PD about to come home. His master's a mess. And I just can't imagine being on these text chains every day, all these assistants talking about sexy items, sexy time items, and lube and baby oil, and clean it up, and Diddy's master's a mess, and we got to get that going. I just can't imagine being that kind of an assistant. Later on in the text messages, they're scrambling. They've run out of supplies. One assistant writes, Brian, following up with all these ordered. We will need it delivered as soon as possible. Honestly, can we Instacart? Then on another page, it turns out that Instacart ran out, didn't have enough to fill the order. It was so big. So the assistant planned to drive out and get it themselves. And later on, if you ask the prosecutors, this orchestration goes into full racketeering mode. KK sends out a full week-long operations plan to the team. Jane is scheduled for multiple Wild King nights. The team is instructed to be fully staffed and on standby. And then the plan shifts. The rapper Young Miami, Diddy's other girlfriend, also scheduled to arrive. And right after Diddy is finished with Jane. And they're supposed to fly out together to the Turks and Caicos. It's clear from what KK writes to the staff that after Jane's Wild King nights, there will be no Wild King nights in the Turks and Caicos when Diddy is with Young Miami. The next message, a full staff schedule, Tuesday through Sunday. The entire enterprise, from sex supplies to travel, cleaning, coordination, and drug handling, was fully organized, staffed, and documented according to prosecutors. And KK even closes the message with this warning, quote, only sharing with this group and not for publication, end quote. You know, it's funny because a lot of the complaints that Jane had on the stand was that she was upset she was the only one who was being forced to do this sex work, the freak-off nights, the Wild King nights, whatever you want to call them. She was the one having to endure 1, 2, 3, 4 escorts, all in one go-round that could last up to 3 days with, a night maybe she had hoped would just be them. She said people like Young Miami, other girlfriends, were getting these trips to the Turks and Caicos with no Wild King nights. Why was I the one being forced to do all this other stuff? So, it's another thing for the jury to take into account. Some of the women were made to do all that stuff. Others were given beautiful birthday parties and trips and cruises and the yacht treatment. But if the girlfriend who was with the escorts was into it, then isn't that on her? That's what they're going to have to decide. And as for KK, oops, that whole list of weekend setups, and I didn't mean this for group publication or publication to the, it's only for us. I guess she did not count on a federal raid, an indictment, a trial, and seized devices that would be squeezed like oranges until every drop of communications was collected and then put into a chart for the jury, for the courtroom, and for my podcast. Agent Cerciello is the last witness that the prosecution plans to call, the final voice in their sweeping case against Sean Diddy Combs, a.k.a. Puff, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. P. Diddy, a.k.a. Love. I still don't get that one, Love. As for the defense, before the jury was even seated this morning, Diddy's lead attorney, Mark Agnifilo, told the court that they will likely not be calling a single witness. Instead, the defense says it plans to introduce a series of pre-approved exhibits into the record. Quiet, controlled, no fireworks, just paperwork. The message is clear. It seems that Diddy's lawyers believe the government hasn't proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard. The charts, the texts, the videos. Diddy's lawyers maybe think that's not enough. You didn't do the trick. You didn't get there. It's either that or Diddy and his team could not find a single witness to make Diddy look good. A single witness that could withstand a withering and damning cross-examination from the government if Diddy put that person up on the stand. Plenty of people would go up there and say, he was a great guy, great boss. I loved him. I learned so much. What a businessman. Wow, billionaire, blah, blah, blah. He got game, fashion sense. But then would come the cross-examination. And the government would probably maybe be able to tear them a new one. And maybe that's what Diddy's lawyers were too afraid of. all the people they could find, if they could find any, to say all these glowing things about Diddy or refute all the things the government has said, well, they'd have to swear an oath and they'd have to answer really hard questions when the other side gets its turn. And then what about Diddy himself? Diddy on the stand. Dang it. I was hoping that the king complex would mean he'd eschew the advice of his lawyers and get on up there himself and just have at her. At which point the government would have at her. Way too dangerous. Just way too dangerous for him to take the stand. Any lawyer will tell you that, right? So I guess maybe he listened. And now the clock is officially ticking. Tenny Garagos will finish her cross-examination of Agent Cerciello tomorrow. And once that's done, both sides will begin preparing for the showdown that we've all been waiting for, closing arguments. They are set to begin on Thursday, and they will not be short. Ms. Garagos told the court today that both the defense and the prosecution expect to take at least 4 hours each to deliver their final arguments. And you throw in a coffee break in the morning and a lunch break in the midday and another midday break in the afternoon. And I don't think they can go more than 8 hours. I mean, now you're getting to 9 and 10 hours. And look, it's not just about whether that courtroom wants to sit there. It's the entire courthouse. It's security. It's the bailiffs. It's the court officers. It's everything. It's the front doors. You can't just set your hours in that courtroom. It's got to correspond with the rest of the courthouse too. So they may not be able to get 2 sets of closing arguments in one day, but I will hope they will. Because if they do, it means that this jury could be deliberating by Friday afternoon. 7 weeks of testimony, dozens and dozens of witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, graphic testimony, dirty, dirty videos, unthinkable allegations. And now it all comes down to 2 final arguments, each side with a final chance to frame this story, and 1 final decision by 12 jurors. Make sure you're subscribed because the next few days are going to be massive. I'm Ashleigh Banfield. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the truth isn't just serious, it's drop dead serious.